Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming along and joining us for our cyber safety webinar for Law Week. We will allow people to sort of come in as they please now, and we'll get started. We're going to switch the video off so that you can focus on our presentation, but we just thought we'd say hi to begin with. So I'll just switch that off. So firstly, we'd like to start with an acknowledgement to country. So Ballarat and Grampians Community Legal Service acknowledges the traditional owners of the region we service, their diversity, histories, knowledge, and their continuing connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, their elders past, present, and emerging. So before we get started with the presentation, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the Victorian Law Foundation for supporting us to bring this webinar to you. COVID-19 has certainly forced us to expand the way in which we deliver our services, and it's been great to have the support and guidance of the foundation. We are very new to this sort of presentation. We've never done online presentations before, so please bear with us with the tech. We are very new to it. So for those of you who don't know much about Ballarat and Grampians Community Legal Service, as our name might suggest, we are a free legal service. We give legal information, advice and education to individuals and groups in the Ballarat, Grampians and Wimmera regions of Victoria. We are a generalist centre, which means that we can help with a wide range of legal problems. These include things such as fines, family law, family violence, and employment law, just to name a few, but it's probably easier to name what we don't do rather than what we do.
Okay, so firstly, we'd like to emphasise today that the session this evening is intended to be information only and doesn't constitute legal advice. If you think that you need some specific legal advice related to your situation, please contact our office and we can book you an appointment or provide appropriate referrals if need be. Our contact details will be provided at the end of the presentation. Today we are talking to you about cyberbullying and sexting laws within Victoria. We'll also discuss some common apps that are being used by young people and provide a few tips on how those apps can be used safely. Please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions throughout the evening. We do ask that you keep your questions general in nature. Again, if you did want to seek advice about your particular circumstance, we won't be answering that type of question during the session, so please just contact our service in the morning or at some stage after today, and we'll go from there. So the questions can be put in the Q&A box or the chat box as we go, and there will be opportunities at the end of each segment to answer those questions and go through them.
So we're going to start with cyberbullying. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is and who it can happen to, and then we'll venture into what the law has to say about it. So in order to understand what cyberbullying is, we have to understand what bullying is. And by definition, bullying is repeated behaviour that is intended to intimidate, threaten, or create fear or discomfort in the person being bullied. Cyberbullying is when that behaviour is done through the use of digital technology. So whether that be using a mobile phone or an online platform, technology is ever evolving, so the definition will extend as that evolves, but things like SMS, email, instant messaging or social media tends to be the weapon of choice. So before we go any further, I just want to mention that the screenshot on the side is quite confronting, and unfortunately it is a real example of the impact of cyberbullying. I don't want to focus too much on this. However, we think it's really important for parents to be aware that this is happening and suicide is becoming an increasing problem among young people. Unfortunately, the victim in this exchange did in fact end up taking their own life. As we see technology evolve and young people discover new ways to interact using that technology, bullying can happen at any time, to anyone and anywhere. We are all guilty of basically being attached to our devices, and this is no different for young people. Although it is usually an extension of bullying that occurs in person within the school gates, it doesn't leave there. It follows them into their personal lives and what should be their safe place at home. So unlike when I went to school, you might experience some nasty comments on the school grounds, and then once the bell rang, you could go home and escape it all. But unfortunately, as technology becomes such a big part of our lives, it's difficult for young people to escape it. On top of that, cyberbullying allows the bully to reach a much larger audience much quicker. We've all been on Facebook and seen a post and the comments that follow. One person has an opinion and then attacks another user, and before you know it, 20 others have joined the conversation and take it upon themselves to attack that person also. I know as an adult, it can be difficult to process that myself. But for young people, this can leave them feeling fearful, isolated, vulnerable, and unsure of who to talk to and what to do.
Okay, so both state and federal laws have provisions for cyberbullying. So it's covered under both Commonwealth and state legislation. The cyberbullying becomes a criminal offence when people use it to threaten, harass individuals or stalk them, when they do things like accessing internet accounts without people's permission, when they tell untruths online, so damaging reputations, and when they encourage suicide. Now, if someone breaks the law, so if someone does any of those things that I've just mentioned, the police may get involved, and that comes with the possibility of having to go to court and the potential for criminal record, which can have long-term consequences in relation to an individual's employment or studies or even travel overseas. The victim and their parents, in some cases, maybe even the police, may even apply for a personal safety intervention order, which is an order that can be put in place by the court to stop someone's behaviour. Although personal safety orders can be applied for, it's often used as not in the first instance, so after other avenues have been explored. Attempts should be made to mediate any issues that have arisen. And ultimately, when children are involved, they've effectively got to go to school with one another, and it can become quite tricky for that to be dealt with by the school. The Office of the eSafety Commissioner may also be able to order the deletion of posts that are offensive or threatening or harassing. They can order that sites take down that material and issue notices to the websites if they don't comply with the direction to take the material down, that they will be fined if they don't do that. Cyberbullying laws allow for prison sentences to be imposed when people break these laws. The maximum penalties are anywhere from 3 years for menacing and harassing behaviour, up to 10 years for stalking. So there's quite serious penalties involved. It's important that young people are aware that their age really isn't a defence to this behaviour. There have been cases reported of people as young as 13 being charged with cyberbullying offences, so it's very important that it's taken seriously. Now we have time for some questions about cyberbullying before we move on to our next topic.
Okay, feel free to ask questions right throughout. If you think of something that about cyberbullying as we move forward, feel free to pop it in the chat box. We can always come to it later. Sexting. Now, this can be a really tricky topic, particularly when trying to discuss it with young people. A lot of the times I find when I'm talking to parents, I'm talking to teachers, they tend to avoid the topic because it is a really tricky one to discuss, and it's a really confronting one to bring up with a young person. But it is incredibly important. We know that young people are doing it, and we need to make sure that if they are going to engage in this sort of behaviour, that we teach them to do it as responsibly as possible. So in order to fully understand the law around sexting, we're going to need to get our heads around age of consent laws, and then we can go into how those apply to sexting laws. Firstly, just a little disclaimer, and I do this every time that I present this to students at school. We're here to provide you with information around what the law says. And when we discuss this with kids, and hopefully when you discuss it with your own children, we want to make it very clear that although the legislation sets out particular age groups who are able to consent by law, there is so much more that needs to go into the decision to engage in sexual activity. We encourage you to talk to your kids about being socially ready, what respectful relationships should look like, and the potential risks and consequences involved. There's also a lot of mature content that's readily accessible online. Gone are the days of having to go to the newsagent to get a magazine and stash it under your bed. It's right at your fingertips on your device. I can tell you that kids as young as 8 are accessing this material, whether it be by mistake or actively pursuing their natural curiosity. So instilling principles of healthy relationships in kids from a young age really helps develop their foundations and values that will hopefully lead to positive future relationships. We cannot stress enough the value of open and transparent communication between a parent and child, particularly around these sensitive issues. By doing so, it makes it far more likely that your child will confide in you if something is to go wrong. We will be going into detail about the laws in Victoria. It's important to know that federal laws and state and territory laws do vary from state to state, territory to territory, and then we have the national overarching laws as well. So if you live close to a border, or there's potential for your children to be engaging with someone online from a different state or overseas, then you should make yourself aware of those laws and how they will apply. We will be sending some links out after this webinar, so the information for other states and territories will follow. So before we talk about the age of consent, we're going to briefly explore the topic of consent. I think it's summed up quite well by saying it's the yes you say when you are free to say no. So consent needs to be an enthusiastic yes, given freely and without duress. There are also a number of factors that can affect someone's ability to give consent, such as alcohol or substance use, or if they're asleep, for example. So if somebody is unsure whether consent has been given or not, they need to stop. It must be expressed and without influence. Now, this is my favourite part. The laws in Victoria around age of consent aren't necessarily straightforward. So please stop me at any time if you have any questions, and we'll break it down as we go along. Essentially, the law says if you are under 12, it is never okay. Even if the younger person agrees or you thought they were older, consent cannot be given under 12. For young people aged 12 to 15, it is against the law for a person to have sex, do sexual acts with or in front of someone who is more than 24 months younger than them. The reason we specifically say 24 months age difference as opposed to 2 years is because that's how the law is written. So if there's more than 24 months, even by just 1 day, they are outside the age of consent and can be charged with a serious offence. So it's important that young people are aware of when people's birthdays are, as well as what ages they are. And I guess this is sort of trying to protect people by making sure that young people are engaging with people of similar age and trying to break down those power imbalances. A 16 or 17-year-old can consent to have sex or do sexual acts with or in front of someone the same age or someone younger than them, as long as the younger person is no more than 24 months younger. They can also consent to have sex or do sexual acts with or in front of someone older than them, but it is against the law if the older person is in a position of care or responsibility over the younger person. This might include someone like a carer or a sports coach, for example. And we often see, particularly when they're getting into those 16 and 17-year-old age brackets, it's not uncommon to have a 19-year-old soccer coach and engage in sexual activity with them, which is effectively breaching the law. So someone who is 17 engaging with their 19-year-old soccer coach, it's not uncommon for that sort of situation to happen. So it's really important that they're clear on this. It's also important to note that the older person has the responsibility to make sure that they are adhering to age of consent laws. So in the situation of the soccer coach, the responsibility would lie on the soccer coach to ensure that they weren't breaking any age of consent laws, not the younger person.
Okay, so now that we've covered consent and age of consent, we will move on to sexting. So what is sexting? Sexting, by definition, is the sending, receiving, or distributing of images and texts that are sexual in nature, usually via mobile phones and social networking sites. It's important to know that sexting laws include suggestive text, not just images. This can be conveyed through text message, email, and messenger services. Most of the time, the phrase sexting isn't used directly, and they're usually referred to as nudes. In Victoria, it is illegal to send on or to share an intimate image of someone who is under 18, even with that person's consent. So under the law, this is called distributing an intimate image. And when it involves someone under the age of 18, you can be charged with the creation of or the distribution of child abuse material. And there are very, very serious penalties for this. It's also illegal to threaten to distribute an intimate image. There are laws that apply to pictures of adults, but they're a little bit different. It is illegal to send or share an intimate image of someone over 18 unless they agreed to sending or sharing it. So in Victoria, there are some exceptions to these rules. So in Victoria, you cannot be prosecuted or pursued by police for child abuse material offences if you take or store an indecent image of yourself. So basically, you're allowed to take photos of yourself and store them if they are of yourself. And similarly, if you keep an intimate image that someone has sent to you, as long as you are under 18 yourself, so both of you are under 18, and that no one in the picture is more than 24 months younger than them, and the picture doesn't show any crimes being committed. So basically, it's that age of consent standard of that 24 months age difference that's applied in these circumstances. So that's really important to remember. Now, under no circumstances though, should the person receiving an intimate image of someone else share that image or show another person, because this could lead to very serious criminal consequences. It can be complicated for older teens, particularly where one of the parties in a relationship is over 18. For example, when a couple starts dating at both 17 years old and intimate images were sent and stored between them, with consent. Once the older person turns 18, any photos should be removed from their devices so that they can't be charged with possession of child abuse material. So that's really important, and it does create issues and confusion for people, because it's effectively that it's okay to have the images one day, but as soon as you turn 18 and the other person's under 18, you need to get rid of them because it's now illegal for you to have those images.
I will just add to that too. It's really important to have the discussion with your young person that although it might be the in thing to do, and it might be, you know, they might feel obliged to send an image because they're being pressured, or they think that if they don't send the image that that person won't like them anymore or they won't go out with them. They really need to consider how much control they lose once they send that image on. So we've seen it all the time where two consenting teenagers send a picture, and at the time they're in love, and then they break up, and that image ends up across their entire friendship groups. So really reiterating that if they are going to do it, although it would be strongly advised that they don't, if they are going to send those intimate images, that they are aware that by doing that, they take on the risk that they've lost control of that image and they can't control who sees it from there.
Okay, so we've got time for some questions about sexting and age of consent.
So we have had a question in regards to accessing child's accounts and whether it poses a privacy issue. That's a very open question, and it could take a little bit more, it probably takes a little bit more research for us, so we're not going to answer that one straight away. So for that question, we'd ask that perhaps you send it in an email to our office and we can get back to you with some details. There would be sort of some circumstances that we would need to go through in order to answer that question effectively. It's not one that's completely cut and dry. In the next little bit, we are going to talk about some practical type examples of how we can potentially monitor access and monitor people's accounts. So that might be enough to get you through, but by all means send us the email and we'll respond to you in the coming days with a few resources. We've also had a question: what if the phone that receives the nude of a child under 18 is actually in the name of the parent?
So I think we can answer this one pretty definitely. If it is the parent's phone, delete it immediately, get rid of it. If it is the child's phone, but just in the name of the parent, that's okay, as long as all of the other exceptions around consent and age apply. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, the other thing importantly to note too as a parent, it can be quite common for a child to receive a nude image and go, oh my God, Mum, look at this, look what so-and-so just sent me. You don't want to see it, because effectively by them showing you that image, they have distributed child abuse material. So it's not just about sending the image, it can be sharing the image, and that can be looking at somebody else's phone or somebody showing you that image. So just be really careful around when your kids are sort of getting these pictures and they say, oh, Mum or Dad, have a look at this. Perhaps just say, I don't need to see that, and you need to consider deleting it too. So pretty much when you're over 18, you don't want to see or store the image. Pretty cut and dry. Yeah. So we've had another question. what if my child watches pornography? And again, I'm going to briefly touch on that in the next section. So we might leave that for the time being. And if it's still if we don't answer your question, then perhaps we can revisit it after the next section. So, of course, due to the current circumstances, there has been an increase in the use of particular apps. During the pandemic, the apps that seem to have really increased in use are apps like House Party and TikTok. So I'm sure you've seen the TikTok app and the videos that come out of that, and they seem fairly harmless on face value. But there are some dangers with each app that your child chooses to use. There are always some considerations that should be made. So what we're going to do is, just keeping those apps in mind, I might just briefly cut back to our question, because we've just had one come through for sexting. So we might keep the apps in mind for a minute, and we'll just briefly touch on this question. So, do I have any obligation to let a child's parents know if their child is sending nudes to my child, unsolicited or otherwise? This is where it gets really tricky in terms of what the law says and how it's enforced or how it's applied. I guess in terms of obligation, there really isn't one. So you're not obliged to let the other child's parents know. And I guess that's a call that you would have to make as a parent. If your child was sending nudes, would you like to be notified by the receiving child's parent? It can be good to sort of have those conversations with parents if you feel comfortable. And we spoke about open and transparent conversations before. We honestly believe that it takes a village to raise a child, and it's so important for parents to be on board and teachers to be on board and young people to be on board when we're talking about responsibility and technology. So if you were in a position where you felt comfortable approaching the other parent and saying, hey, look, your child's sending nudes to my child, and either it's unwanted or they're consenting to send those images. I just wanted to sort of talk it out with you and see how we approach it as parents with the kids. That's completely up to you. But in terms of an actual legal obligation to do so, there is none. I hope that answers your question. So back to the most common apps. I'm sure that none of those images are overly unfamiliar to you. I'm sure we've all seen them, whether we use them ourselves or we've had some sort of contact with them. But I'd just like to go through a few things that often people don't think about. The number one thing I think, and the thing that really bothers me, is location settings. Now, making sure your location settings are off on your child's phone is extremely important. And it's not always a default. So often apps have a default set to being open or public, and you have to actually physically go in and make them private. So just if your device's location settings are private, it doesn't necessarily mean that the app locations are private. So you must check that. Now, I've popped a picture on that slide, and that's me. So this is in Snapchat, and I'm ghosted, as you can see. So my face is covered, meaning that nobody can see where I am. So I have my location settings off on that particular app. But I just wanted to give you the example because of how accurate that map is. It not only gives my general vicinity, it shows me in the exact building that I'm currently sitting in. So people are able to trace you or your young people, they will be able to trace their location using apps like Snapchat to the very house that they are living in. Not to mention, if you are not in ghost mode, anything you post on your story can be viewed by anyone, even if they aren't your friend. So I can jump on and I can go to the map and I can have a look at what people are doing in Texas, for example. That's how far the map can go. So making sure location settings are off is incredibly important. Accepting friend requests from strangers. So there's some apps that you need to accept friend requests before they can see your content, and there's others that are public for anyone to see. So Instagram, for example, when you're setting up your Instagram, you have to purposely make it private, otherwise anyone can see your posts. House party is similar, and we've seen an increase in the use of house party during the pandemic and the restrictions that have come with it. You can either close your room or you can have your house party so that anybody can join. And these pose risks because often, or not often, but it poses risks in terms of people using those devices or using those applications in order to groom children or to scam them. So it's really important that we practice stranger danger as much online as we do in the real world. TikTok's a little bit different in the sense that whatever video you post, you don't actually have to accept friends or accept requests from people. Any video that you post can be viewed by anyone. And so they can sort of, again, put explicit material or put inappropriate material, and anybody can be watching that around the world. And with things like screen recording, screenshots, those images can then be uploaded to websites for later use. Online gaming is something that is forgotten about. So we see kids playing Fortnite or Minecraft or Roblox, and we sometimes forget that there are chat functions within those online gaming platforms, and quite often young children are groomed on those chat platforms. And also we're seeing a rise in the number of scams as well. So asking for personal details, asking for either banking details or addresses and phone numbers, those sorts of things. So don't be fooled that gaming doesn't come with risks, because it certainly does. Another thing that I think is important and again quite often forgotten is the addictive nature of these social media platforms and even just devices in general. So addictive traits can be developed at a young age and then carry with them into adulthood, and it can be transferred across other sort of outlets, and we can see that they can develop these addictive personalities, and then it can sometimes later down the track create problems with things like gambling and those sorts of things. So there are parental control applications that allow you to monitor the time that your child spends on particular apps or the time that they spend on their devices. And you might also want to look into setting some rules about where devices are used within the home. So perhaps making it so that devices are used in common areas rather than in their bedrooms with the door closed. And contrary to the belief of many young people, there are these wicked awesome things called alarm clocks, and they don't have to be in your phone. So if they give you the excuse of, I need to set my alarm and that's why I need to have my phone with me, they can have an alarm clock instead. Another thing that happens is advertisements, and I was only talking about this with my colleagues today, and how advertisements that pop up in social media are often things that we've spoken about or often things that we've searched a long time ago. So making sure that your kids are aware that they can select the type of advertisements that they see on social media, and you can change your settings to make sure that the ads that they're seeing aren't inappropriate or tempting. You know, that we have lots of scams going on in advertisements and those sorts of things. So make sure that you set their settings so that they're seeing ads that are appropriate to them. and explicit or inappropriate content. And this sort of goes back to what I was saying before. And the reality is that pornography is readily available to anyone who wants to view it. And although there are somewhat protective measures that make these sites feel like they're doing the socially correct thing by having "Are you over 18?", it is incredibly easy to tick the box that says you are of age. And we've all been teenagers. I was a teenager once, and it is incredibly easy to tick that box to say that you're over 18, and natural curiosity does play a part in that. But this is where parental blocks can be really useful, and you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on these parental blocks. There are apps that are free, and you can set up blocks to particular websites and those sorts of things. So I guess it's sort of an age-appropriate thing as to how much you discuss and what you discuss with your children in terms of pornography. Obviously, if they're 8, you need to have the conversation about how they shouldn't be looking at that sort of material, and it's not appropriate. If they're 16 or 17, it might be something it might be a conversation that goes a little bit differently, but you need to have those age-appropriate conversations and really reinforce that pornography is not what is common in the real world, and that we need to reinforce respectful relationships and what that looks like. So we come back to what I've been harping about all night, and that's the encouraging conversation. Open and transparent conversation is imperative to build trust and make your child feel comfortable to come to you. I would like to see that parents communicate with their children about their online interactions as they would with their in-person interactions. So like you'd ask your child after school, "How was school today? Who'd you hang out with?" Perhaps you'd like to say, particularly while they're learning from home, "How was your day? How did you go with your online learning? Did you chat to anyone today? Were there any challenges with that chat?" All those sorts of things. Statistics say that a little over 50% of young people aged 10 to 15 who were being bullied or experiencing difficulties online confided in their parents first. So that's over their teachers, that's over their friends. So statistics is saying that kids are wanting to confide in their parents, and by encouraging conversation and being open and transparent with them from the get-go, it just reinforces that they feel comfortable to come and have a chat with you. I've mentioned parental controls, monitoring access to screen time and those sorts of things. It's okay to ask your children to follow their social media accounts. So I guess that goes back to, can you hack into their accounts? What we would be encouraging is that you actively seek to engage with them online. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that your child wants you to be following every post they do and liking all their posts and commenting and saying, "Oh, that's wonderful." But if you build a relationship with your child whereby they're comfortable for you to follow their social media accounts so that you can keep somewhat of an eye on them without being actively involved in conversations, that might be a way for you to set boundaries but also respect their boundaries. It's also really important that you take note of their mood and their behaviour changes. So we know that the signs that a child might be experiencing some difficulties online, it could be that they're anxious to go to school, so they come home and they don't want to go to school, or they don't want to face someone at school. They have a low or depressed mood. And it could also mean that they become withdrawn. So a lot of the time when kids are experiencing trouble online, they'll spend a lot of their time in their bedroom, away from the family. So that's where it could be a really good move to say, okay, we're all going to work on our devices, or we're all going to be on our devices together in a common room. No one's on their devices in a bedroom, and we're all going to be there together, just so you can monitor their behaviour and their reactions when they're online. When I talk to kids at schools, they they sort of say, well, what can I do if someone comments or posts or things like that? And quite often they forget the common sense approach. And there's an approach called the BIRD method, and that's block, ignore, report, delete. Kids often get sort of swept up into this whirlwind of social media and engaging with other young people online, and they forget that these apps have the measures to be able to block someone or ignore someone. Every app that I've tested and tried has the opportunity for you to report inappropriate behaviour or harassment direct to the app and have them deal with it. So often it's the common sense approach of teaching young people that it's okay to block someone. It's okay to unfriend someone or unfollow them if they're not giving any positive reinforcement in their lives. So there is this resistance I find with young people. They could just turn their devices off, but that would be like cutting off their arm. So teaching kids that it's okay to do that thing. It's okay to step away from the screen for a little while. That's fine. It's okay to block that person if they're being harassing or menacing. You can contact the school and or the police, and I reinforce that if there is an immediate danger to your child, please reinforce to them that it's okay to contact police. If they are fearful and they fear for their safety in that present moment, they must contact police. Police will then deal with it from there. If they feel that it's not warranted for them to be involved, they'll provide the appropriate referrals. But they're always more than willing to accept a call and have it be something on the minor end of the scale than they would be to not accept that call and have it be something serious that could potentially be fatal. You can always contact us and speak to a lawyer about your rights or options for your children and those sorts of things. Mediation through the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria is a great way for you to try and resolve or assist your kids in resolving issues between them and their friends. And we would always recommend that mediation is sought before any other more drastic measure, such as a personal safety intervention order. However, those orders are in place for a reason. They are available for a reason. So if you have exhausted those measures, by all means, where appropriate and necessary, explore the avenue of a personal safety intervention order.
Okay, so that's it for our presentation tonight. We do have time for questions about keeping kids safe if you did have any questions about that last topic. Otherwise, thank you all for registering and attending. We are very passionate about creating safe environments for young people to make sure that they can explore technology responsibly, and you all as parents and carers play a vital role in this. So thank you for your participation. We will stay online again just for a little longer in case anyone does have any last minute questions, and our contact details will be put up shortly if you did want to follow up with us. We will also be sending out some resources later tonight along with a short evaluation, and we would love your feedback. Thank you everyone, and good night.